So in this segment, we're going to be talking about the Environment Agency in the UK telling staff to ignore pollution complaints, says an ex-employee. So this is a slightly older article, but it's very serious. If you want to understand why we're having one of the reasons why we're having such bad pollution problems in the UK, because some of the dumping in this country is done illegally. Okay, there have been investigations into it, and they're still investigating certain water companies, the legality of their actions. I'm not going to name specific ones here because I don't want to get sued by any of them. Point being is that some of them are under investigations for potential illegal dumping of sewage in the UK waterways because they have to justify their actions. But now you've got the Environmental Agency actually not doing its job and listening to the public. It's been hollowed out by the government, just like they've done with so many other things like the CPS. For example, the CPS can't do their job properly and you have all sorts of problems within the courts. And this is just another example of kind of Tory austerity really coming to haunt the country. So England's rivers will continue to deteriorate unless the Environmental Agency stops shutting down the public's calls about pollution, according to an ex-employee. So you have people, members of the public, calling the Environmental Agency saying, look, there's dumping going on, raw sewage or whatever's being dumped in the water, please check this out, do something. And they're saying, yeah, nah, cool, nah, bruh. Officers are told to ignore calls from the public and told not to look at possible incidents if the caller thinks they are low impact, meaning they fall into so-called category 3 or 4, and the Environmental Agency has their own kind of metrics for the 1 to 4 categories for pollution or dumping or whatever. This has left staff demoralised, says Helen Nightingale, a catchment planner in northwest Lancashire who left the Environmental Agency in April because evidently maybe she thinks she can't do her job because the Environmental Agency just doesn't have the funds or doesn't want to deal with the problems at hand. She says it's a sad day when the employees working within a regulator feel they cannot do their jobs, especially when they're trying to do such an important job like keep the waterways clear so the people and animals, the marine life, don't get sick. So respect them for calling out the Tories and calling their agency out. So that's me saying that's my kind of take on it. Once a river is damaged, it becomes harder to have a major incident on it. You can only kill so many fish. Once you've already killed them, the chance of getting significant incident recorded is reduced, said Nightingale. So I guess what they're saying is once the dumping starts, there's no point stopping it because the damage is already done, right? Might as well let people bleed out after they've been shot or stabbed. Such a dumb policy, in my opinion. Just because there's been dumping in the water, like that river or that waterway, that stream can clear up after a while. It can bring some semblance of life back if you stop the dumping from happening in the future. If it's a one-off, nature can recover there. We've seen that before, as long as it's not like something really, really toxic. But the way the agency seems to look at it is, well, they've already dumped stuff before, who cares? Between 2010 and 2021, the agency's annual budget for enforcement fell from 11.6 million to 7 million. So you can see that's a huge reduction in the agency's budget, especially when typically budgets go up year on year, not down. That's directly because of the Tories, thanks to George Osborne and David Cameron. So austerity strikes again for all the Rory Stewart apologists out there. Those Tories still did endless damage. I always see my mentions, I wish the Tories would go back to being, moderates or Cameron era and stuff like that. And I'm like, they did immeasurable damage to this country. You do not want to go back to that era. Get rid of the lot of them. Without staff to go out and look at these incidents, the Environmental Agency relies on the public to accurately report on the impact. You wouldn't get a member of the public to assess you if you had a car accident. The general public aren't experts, she said. And that's a great point in my opinion. Members of the public would not really know how to assess the scale of something like sewage dumping or the equipment needed to assess that, plus the fact that the agency can talk them down a bit, otherwise the water regulator would have to actually send people out there, which they don't have the money for. So say, for example, if someone says there's loads of oil being dumped in the water, and the agency says, well, how much oil is being dumped in? They're like, I don't know, maybe a few barrels. And then they're like, so yeah, it's not that bad. It's category 3. No one's going to bother to check. Officers will still go out at rarer category 1 and 2 incidents, such as blue-green algae currently carpeting Lake or Widdermere, that are considered to have a major significant impact on the environment. Data from a national incident recording system shows that in 2021 there were 116,000 potential incidents reported and only 8,000 were attended. So they're not even attending 10% of incidents, which is wild. This goes to show you that the category incidents they're meant to go out for, they don't even attend as often as they should, which means this agency is failing badly. And there's a lot at stake here. Clean water is integral for any country to function. If If you phone up and report a category 3 and someone in the call centre says, we're not going to attend this, you're not going to keep calling up because you feel like you're wasting your time. So we are getting less and less evidence on what's been happening in the river, said Nightingale. An example of category 3 could be a 2-kilometre spill of oil or sewage in the river. How the hell, in my opinion, could a 2-kilometre oil spill not be declared a major incident? Not worth checking, or even a 2-kilometre spill of sewage. And again, she's right. Why would you keep calling up the agency and asking them to do something? This means less reports on pollution, which makes the agency look better because there'll be less reports for them to write about. As well as getting the public to report in the environmental agency is relying on water companies to police themselves. They're under-reporting, under-classifying, trying to sort it out before anyone gets there. And as a private company, you do that. She said bonuses paid to water companies executives increased by 20% last year. Did the service improve by 20% last year? Don't think so. With the average executive getting a one-off payment of £100,000 in addition to their salaries. And you can't expect an industry to self-regulate, especially when they can justify sewage dumping by claiming they had no choice. If that's not looked into, they'll keep dumping because dealing with sewage and flooding properly costs money. Whilst dumping is cheap, these CEOs exist to maximise profits for their shareholders, not to make sure the water is clean. There's a clear conflict of interest there, in my opinion. When Nightingale started the job 31 years ago, she was out of the office almost all the time. Now environment officers get out of the office for a maximum 1 day a week, or some sneaking out more often. They're sneaking out to do their jobs. It's wild. The agency's handcuffing them. That would be under both Tory and Labour governments then. That should be out most days. We're talking the John Major era. It's clear that the agency has changed the rules around which checks are worth looking at. They have to actively go out and look at the spillages, maybe take samples, also quiz these water companies to make sure they have the right licenses and have followed the procedure properly. That would have been in the old days, the great days of John Major and Tony Blair, or Gordon Brown, evidently. She says it's depressing, it's completely demoralising. I can do more environmental good in my back garden than I could when I was at the. I could do more good in my back garden than I could when I was at work at the end, said Nightingale, who believes rivers are just written off because staff are told only to look at incidents once they've become serious or very serious. But the thing is, preventative care is so important here because you might not get a serious incident until you get, massive amounts of sewage being dumped in or massive amounts of oil being dumped in. And the only reason that's happening is because the agency isn't being proactive and really taking these companies to task when they have small spillages. It does look like the regulator has just given up. Some of these investigations take years. The more funding is cut, the harder their jobs are. We have seen the same with the CPS. They've been hollowed out. There are so many people leaving. The agency can't recruit enough people to fill the gaps, she says, with many feeling really demotivated. It's sad that people aren't being allowed to do their job. You get the criticism and you're not able to defend yourself. Now, I can imagine they feel kind of pointless, like they can't actually do their jobs. Nightingale's comments come ahead of the Dispatch's investigation, which revealed the extent of untreated sewage being flushed into waterways. The investigation shows there were more than 870 sewage discharge pipes across the UK which do not have a permit, meaning water companies may be using them to illegally dump untreated sewage. So without the regulator looking into this, you won't know which companies have permits to dump sewage and what process they have followed beyond those using the old storm drains. This is such a huge scandal that no one seems to care about, that some of these companies can just get away with this stuff because, it's like having a city where there's no police officers. People just get away with all sorts of crimes. The investigation also found fecal pollution on Ryde Beach on the Isle of Wight, which is rated as having excellent water quality, was 40 times higher than usual. So those areas that previously had high water quality marks will have to be re-looked at. Another issue here is the marine life. People who eat fish, they'll become, or they become sick. Any shellfish from these areas that might have grade A status might not classify as being grade A anymore. So without being purified, they could make people sick. People who swim in those waters might get sick because the water has become polluted. This stuff spread so far from the UK, it's even impacting France. There was a really good Byline Times report about this stuff last year, where someone, got the water, took a water sample, and really looked into it, and it was harming a lot of the beach users, the people who swim in the sea. It was absolutely horrible. I remember covering it at the time. It follows recent analysis that found sewage monitors at popular seaside destinations are not working or not installed, so that it's not even monitoring them. It is genuinely like getting rid of the police in a dodgy area. It genuinely is. If this, if this is the case, then all bets are off. We have no idea how much sewage is actually being dumped because no one is keeping an eye on the sewage discharges. If these companies do not declare major incidents when they dump sewage, people who swim in these beaches might become sick because they're not being monitored. So do they even have to declare it at that point? We saw that last year when the Byline Times covered it. Surfers and other beachgoers got sick from the water. Christine Colvin from the Rivers Trust said environment officers are on the front lines of pollution, nature and climate crises worldwide. They are the guardians of our future. It's heartbreaking to hear how their work is being undermined and how they are struggling to stay motivated. We absolutely need more boots on the ground and boots that are unable to get the job done and enforce the law. An Environment Agency spokesperson said, like every public organisation given finite resources, will always focus our efforts on the greatest threats to the environment. That's why they've got this category system of 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're saying we'll always focus our efforts on the greatest threats to the environment. So what this means is they admit it's a money issue. They don't have the funding. Isn't that sad? Like the regulator, the regulator had the funds, then it would be, if the regulator had the funds, then it would be able to hold water companies accountable. But they can't. Instead, we don't even know the scale of the sewage dumping because the monitors around those beaches are not even working. It just shows you that this country is just not working. That's a typo. It's just not working. That the monitors at the beaches aren't working. That the technology, whatever they have to monitor the sewage discharges at the beach and maybe make sure the water is clear, it's not working. The regulator is admitting that it's a financial issue. They just don't have the money to be able to deal with the pollution, the water companies effectively, so they get away with it like bandits and they make massive profits from it because if they don't have to bind the chemicals, which these water companies blame Brexit. They said, because of Brexit we can't get the chemicals we need in, and I think the government just said, cool, if you have to dump the water then do it, and they were like, yeah, sweet, because chemicals cost money, dumping doesn't. If they just chuck this stuff into the ocean or the rivers, they don't care. There was two really good videos from the Byline Times that stuck with me. There was a guy who was checking out some stuff in the rivers, and he was just hit with a massive avalanche of just raw sewage being dumped in to the stream he was in. It was wild. He's caught it all on video. I remember covering that as well, and it's just, without the Byline Times and the Guardian covering this stuff, we wouldn't even know about the scale of the problems. The Environmental Agency is clearly not doing its job. Ofwat is clearly not doing its job. And maybe it is just down to a funding issue that they don't have the money to challenge, these bigger water companies. They don't have the money to go to all of these events, all of these, these cases where raw sewage and other stuff's being dumped into water. And what that means is people just suffer from it. Especially with the government talking about bringing back fracking, you're going to see more polluted water. And what does that mean for the average person? There's so many different things reliant on the waterways in England, in any country. It's not just about the marine life or the animals or about the people, it's about farms and other things as well that are reliant on having access to clean water. There was a guy who went up to a bunch of fracking executives and said, you guys said you would drink the water from this area, go and drink it then. It's like some brown, polluted, really gross looking glass of water, and the exec said, no, I ain't going to drink that. Because that's the situation the UK is heading in. A country that, in some places, especially I think around the south of England, Tory heartland, might not have clean water. Genuinely might not have clean water and clean waterways. They're already talking about recycling the water, and people need to get used to drinking cleaned up sewage water or something like that. And I was like, what are you talking about, pal? What are you talking about? But anyways, without being at risk of turning into the rambling madman, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.